a sky the color of gunmetal hanging low over the wide and lonely plains as Elena Marston stands beside the charred beams that once formed the proud heart of her family ranch, and the heavy smell of smoke still clings to the air, though the flames have long died away, and in that smoldering ruin she feels the weight of everything she has lost pressing down on her chest until she can barely breathe, and her hands tremble as she kneels in the dirt and touches the blackened remains of the porch rail that her father once carved by hand, and the memory of his laughter echoes faintly in her mind like a ghost refusing to fade away. She tries to steady herself, but the grief keeps rising in waves that crash against her resolve, and each wave brings back the crackling roar of fire, the terrifying yells in the night, and the pounding of hooves as the raiders swept through the ranch like a storm unleashed by a merciless sky. And she remembers how she hid her younger brother in the root cellar, how she tried to fight her way back to her parents, and how the smoke choked her lungs until she collapsed outside the burning home, unable to save anyone. And in that moment she believed that all mercy had abandoned her. Elena knows the Apache warriors were blamed for the violence, and though she never saw their faces clearly, she remembers the glimpse of painted horses and the sound of voices in a language she did not understand, and in her shattered heart those fragments hardened into a certainty that the Apache were responsible for tearing her life apart and leaving her with nothing but ashes and silence. And so in that broken dawn she made a vow in the deepest part of her soul that she would hate them until the last breath left her body. The vow becomes the fire that keeps her standing when everything else feels lost, for anger is the only thing she has left to cling to, and it burns with a fierce and terrible brightness that keeps her from collapsing under the despair. And as she walks across what remains of the horse corral and the barn, she feels that anger sharpen into a blade that cuts through every memory, every question, and every possible doubt, until it becomes the unshakable truth she chooses to live by. Neighbors ride in to help, but their kind words do little to ease her pain, for she feels like a stranger in her own land, and when they speak of rebuilding, she can barely listen because she knows that no new house, no fresh lumber, no future plan will bring back the warm embrace of her mother, or the steady voice of her father, or the innocent smile of her younger brother, and so she stands apart from them, her arms folded tight as if trying to hold the scattered pieces of herself together. As the sun rises higher, the wind sweeps through the ruins, carrying sparks of memory that sting with every breath, and Elena walks to the hill behind the ranch where she once watched sunsets beside her father, and from there she can see the wide horizon stretching endlessly, and yet she feels trapped within her own sorrow, unable to move forward and unable to let go, and she whispers her vow again, letting the wind carry her anger across the plains as if sending a warning to the ones she blames for all this pain. She does not know that her world is already shifting unseen, and that her path will soon cross with a man whose presence will shake every belief she holds, and yet, for now, she remains certain of her hatred, clinging to it as if it were the only thing she has left in a life built from ashes and memories, and in that certainty, she steels herself for whatever the future might bring, believing she is ready, though she has no idea how wrong she is, or how the heart she believes is broken beyond repair will burn again, not with rage, but with something far more powerful and far more dangerous than she ever expected, a restless wind pushing across the open trail as Elena travels with a small escort toward the settlement of Red Bluff, and though the others ride in steady silence, she cannot quiet the storm brewing inside her chest, for every hoofbeat brings back the memory of her ruined home and the vow she carved into her heart like a warning brand, and she rides stiffly, her jaw set, her gaze fixed on the distant ridges as if daring anything to challenge her. Men protecting her are neighbors and volunteers, and though they mean well, their presence offers little comfort, for Elena has begun to feel like danger follows her everywhere, and she keeps scanning the trees, the rocks, the hillsides, always expecting a shadow, a flicker, a sudden movement, and the tension coils in her stomach until she feels almost sick with it, yet she refuses to show fear. For fear is weakness in her mind, and weakness is something she has sworn to leave behind as the trail narrows near a stretch of sandstone cliffs. The air grows heavy with a strange stillness that makes the hairs on her neck rise, and she slows her horse, listening, trying to understand what feels wrong, but before she can speak, a sharp cry splits the silence and the first arrow whistles past her ear with a terrifying hiss, and panic erupts around her as the escort fires back while shouting for her to run and take cover. The chaos blurs into a whirlwind of dust shouts and the thunder of hooves as masked riders surge from behind the rocks, and Elena feels her horse rear as a lasso snaps tight around her waist, dragging her from the saddle. And she hits the ground hard, her breath stolen, her vision spinning, while the world becomes a rush of movement and fear, and she tries to scream, but the sound sticks in her throat. Hands grab her arms, pulling her upward, and she struggles with every ounce of strength she has, kicking, clawing, refusing to be taken by the very people she swore to hate, for the thought of it feels like drowning in fire. And she hears the shouts of the men who traveled with her fading into the distance, and then another sound emerges, a low, steady voice commanding the others in a tone filled with authority. Before she can make sense of what is happening, she is lifted onto a horse in front of a broad-chested warrior whose grip is strong yet strangely careful. And she feels the warmth of his arm securing her as he guides the horse away from the fighting, and the rhythm of the gallop jolts through her bruised body with every stride until the world becomes a blur of color and speed. Her heart hammers wildly as she tries again to break free, but the warrior pulls her closer, preventing her from falling, and though her mind screams in fury and terror, some small part of her notices the steadiness of his hold and the way he shields her from stray arrows flying past, and this only heightens her confusion because she does not understand why an enemy would protect her. The riders travel hard for miles, crossing ridges and weaving through narrow passes until the sounds of pursuit vanish, and the group finally slows at a hidden clearing tucked within the high country, and Elena is barely conscious from exhaustion, fear, and the throbbing ache in her ribs. Yet she forces herself to remain alert, unwilling to show any weakness before the people she holds responsible for her pain. When the warrior dismounts, he lifts her gently and sets her on the ground with unexpected care, and she stares up at him through strands of dust-coated hair, trying to reconcile the image before her with the fury she carries, and he speaks to her in a calm, even tone, a language flowing with cadence and strength, though she cannot understand the words. Fear flares again, and she backs away until her shoulders strike a rock, and she stands trembling and ready to fight, though she knows she cannot win, and the warrior watches her with eyes that do not reflect cruelty but something far more complex, something that unsettles her more than hostility ever could. She does not yet know his name, nor his purpose, nor the truth behind why she was taken, and yet in that moment, as the wind sweeps through the secluded clearing and the shadows lengthen across the stone, it becomes clear that her life has shifted onto a path she never wanted and never expected, and the vow of hatred she carries will soon be challenged by the very man who now stands before her, silent, steady, and unreadable as the mountains rising behind him. Elena, standing in the center of the secluded Apache camp, though every muscle in her body trembles with exhaustion and defiance as she watches the warriors dismount and disperse with silent efficiency, and the air around her hums with tension, for she is the only outsider, the only captive, and every gaze that lands on her feels sharp enough to pierce bone. Yet, even in her fear, she keeps searching for the warrior who captured her, the one whose steady voice guided the others and whose arms held her firm during the wild flight through the cliffs. And soon he approaches, stepping through the circle of gathered warriors with a quiet authority that draws every eye to him, and she realizes that he commands not through cruelty but through a presence as solid as the mountains rising beyond the camp. He stops a few strides away and studies her with an expression she cannot read, and his dark eyes carry a depth that unsettles her more than anger ever could, for anger would be familiar. But this calm steadiness feels foreign and dangerous in ways she cannot name, and she lifts her chin, refusing to look away, even though her heart slams against her ribs with every breath. One of the older warriors steps forward, speaking in low tones to the man who brought her, and though Elena cannot understand the words she hears, the frustration beneath them, and she realizes they had not planned to take a captive, that she is here because of something unexpected, something that appended whatever intention they carried into the ambush. Voices rise for a moment like sparks, catching wind until the warrior who captured her lifts a hand and silence falls through the circle, and Elena feels the weight of that simple gesture, the unspoken command woven through it, and for the first time she begins to understand that he holds a role of great respect among them, and this realization twists sharply inside her because she had always imagined Apache leaders as ruthless figures born of violence and cruelty. He speaks again, and though the meaning is lost to her, the tone is calm, sure, and she hears no threat hidden within it, and when he finishes, the others step back, leaving only him standing before her, and he moves closer with a slow, intent step that makes her pulse leap, and she backs up instinctively until her shoulders press against the rough bark of a pine tree. He kneels slightly to meet her gaze, and for a long moment neither of them speaks, and the wind drifts between them, carrying the scent of pine resin dust and lingering smoke from the nearby cook fires, and she fights to hold onto her vow of hatred, but it wavers slightly under the weight of his measured stare. At last he touches his chest and speaks a name in that fluid, powerful tongue, and she hears it clearly this time, Taza, and as the sound settles in the air, he gestures lightly toward her with an open hand, a gesture that means no harm, and the shock of it disorients her more than if he had drawn a blade. She answers with her own name, though her voice shakes from exhaustion and rage, and when she speaks, Elena, the name feels small and fragile in the vast wilderness surrounding them, and Taza repeats it with a steady tone that sends an unexpected shiver down her spine, for the way he says it carries neither mockery nor triumph, but something closer to respect. Camp begins to move with evening chores as women carry woven baskets, children dart between lodges, and warriors tend to their horses, and as Elena watches, she feels her certainty cracking ever so slightly, for these people do not resemble the monsters she had painted in her imagination, and though she tries to hold onto her fury, it slips through her fingers like water. Taza gestures for her to follow, and she hesitates, unwilling to obey yet unable to resist, as two younger warriors stand nearby ready to intervene, and she takes a reluctant step, then another, until she matches his pace, and he leads her to a small lodge set apart from the others, a place where she will stay under his protection. The word protection strikes her like a blow because she never imagined she would hear such a promise from an Apache warrior, and though she does not trust him, she cannot ignore the truth in his steady posture and the quiet shield he forms between her and the stairs around them. And when she steps into the lodge, she realizes with a sinking confusion that nothing she believed about her captors is as simple or solid as she once thought, and every piece of her hatred is now beginning to tremble under the weight of a man whose presence challenges everything she has clung to since the night her world burned. Elena, confined within the small lodge, though it is not a prison, for its walls are made of soft woven branches, and smoke drifts lazily from the hearth, and the air smells of drying herbs and the sharp scent of pine from outside, and despite the safety, she feels caged by the presence of warriors waiting just beyond the doorway, ready to ensure she cannot escape, and she paces the floor, restless with a mixture of fear and defiance and fury that simmers under her skin like a hidden fear. Taza sits across from her in quiet meditation, though his eyes never leave her face, and every small movement he makes is precise, deliberate, controlled, and though Elena's instinct tells her to keep her distance, her gaze is drawn again and again to the depth of his eyes, to the way his body radiates strength without a hint of aggression, and she feels an unfamiliar tension coil in her stomach at the thought of being in his presence alone with him. She speaks first with sharp words laced with accusation, recounting the loss of her home, the death of her parents, the horrors of the night that defined her life, and she expects him to respond with anger or dismissal, yet he does not flinch, and when he finally speaks, it is in a calm voice that carries neither apology nor blame, but a steady clarity that forces her to hear things differently than she ever has, and for the first time, she senses that the world she has imagined is not as simple as black and white or right and wrong. The conversation stretches long into the day as the wind moves through the lodge, shifting the shadows across the walls, and with every sentence, Elena finds her anger chafing against a truth she is unwilling to admit, and Taza listens with patience unshakable, as if he understands the tempest within her more clearly than she does herself, and the moments of silence between them are heavy with unspoken thoughts and questions that neither dares to voice. Yet both feel outside the lodge children laugh, chasing one another around the camp, and the sound is alien to Elena, because it is innocent and untouched by the cruelty she associates with this world, and through the woven walls she sees women tending fires, weaving baskets, carrying water, and for a fleeting moment she is struck by the rhythm of life that continues despite the chaos and loss that exist beyond the camp, and she realizes with a jolt that her own perception has been clouded by grief and fury, and that not all who belong to this tribe are anemias. Taza gestures toward the window, letting her see the life of the camp, and she hesitates, then steps closer, her eyes scanning every figure, every movement, and though she tries to resist the curiosity clawing at her, she cannot deny the beauty and dignity and the simplicity of their lives, and though her vow of hatred burns inside her, she feels a reluctant admiration mingling with confusion and guilt. As the day fades toward evening, Taza rises and moves to the hearth, placing his hands over the small fire, and as the light flickers across his face, she sees the gentle lines beneath his strong features, the careful movements of someone who balances power with responsibility, and she wonders briefly how a man like him could be responsible for any of the suffering she believes was caused by his people. He speaks again, softly offering her food and water, a gesture of care, and though she wants to reject it, she finds her hand trembling as it reaches for the bowl, and the warmth of the food against her fingers brings a strange comfort, and she cannot help but notice the steadiness of his hands, the precision of his movements, the way he watches her with patience and a silent understanding, and though she refuses to admit it aloud, she feels her heart faltering for the first time since the fire consumed her home. As the firelight dances on the walls of the lodge, Elena sits with Taza, and the tension between them shifts into something fragile and unspoken. And though she hates herself for it, she cannot deny the flicker of something dangerous, something powerful stirring inside her, something that challenges her vow and begins to question everything she thought she knew about hate, trust, and the truth of the people she once believed were her enemies, and she feels, for the first time, that the line she drew in her heart may be more fragile than she ever imagined. Elena wakes to a dull ache in her side from the cut that she barely noticed before, and a fever that burns through her like wildfire, and though she tries to hide it, she cannot ignore the chills and shivers racking her body, and Taza notices immediately, moving to her side with a quiet concern that unsettles her because she expects coldness or indifference and not the careful attention of someone whose presence she both resents and cannot yet fully trust. He speaks softly in his language, words that she does not understand, yet the tone carries meaning like a promise or a warning, and when he gently presses his hand to her forehead, she flinches instinctively from the touch, yet feels the strange warmth that spreads from his palm into her skin, and the closeness makes her pulse race, and the anger she has clung to for so long begins to waver under the weight of something unfamiliar and confusing. Taza fetches water and herbs from a small bundle by the hearth and begins tending to her wound with skillful hands that move deliberately and carefully, and Elena cannot help but notice how strong yet gentle his touch is, how every movement is measured as if he is attuned to the fragility of life itself, and though she struggles to maintain her composure, she feels a flicker of gratitude and something far more dangerous stirring in her chest. Fever climbs and her vision blurs as she lies back against the woven mat, and she feels the rise and fall of his chest near her shoulder, and though she fights the urge to lean closer, the warmth radiating from him makes it impossible to deny the pull she feels toward him, and every instinct that once screamed hatred now battles with something raw and unnameable. Through the long hours of the night he does not leave her side, speaking quietly at intervals, offering water, adjusting the blankets, gently repositioning her with a care that defies her expectations, and each gesture chips away at the walls she built around her heart, walls that have protected her from loss and pain, but now tremble under the weight of tenderness. She cannot resist. Elena finds herself watching him more closely than she intends, noting the way his dark hair falls across his forehead, the strength of his jaw, the intensity of his eyes, even in the dim flicker of firelight, and she feels a stirring deep within her chest. A mixture of admiration, fear, and a longing she refuses to acknowledge, and yet the feeling grows stronger with every careful movement he makes. As dawn approaches, the fever finally breaks, leaving her weak and trembling but alive, and she glances at Taza and sees that he has not slept either, remaining vigilant throughout the night, and for the first time she sees a vulnerability in him, the quiet exhaustion hidden behind his stoic exterior, and the realization hits her like a lightning strike that the man who has unsettled every certainty she has ever held is also one who can protect and nurture in ways she never imagined. In the soft light of morning she tries to rise, and he gently presses her back down, guiding her with calm authority, and she feels the gentle heat of his hand on her arm. And though she wants to resist, she cannot stop the shiver that runs through her body and the warmth spreading through her chest at the same time, and every moment they share in that quiet space deepens a bond that frightens her, even as it awakens a part of her heart she thought was dead. By the time she can sit up fully, she understands that her hatred is no longer enough to hold her heart in chains, that the walls she has built are cracked and vulnerable, and that the warrior who saved her life has already begun to break through them with a touch, a word, a glance that carries more power than anger ever could. And though she struggles to reconcile this with everything she believed, she cannot deny the truth emerging between them, a truth that will shape everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the fragility of the heart. Elena, still weak from her fever, takes her first real steps through the Apache camp, guided by Taza, and the sunlight filters through the tall pines, casting dappled shadows across the woven lodges and the fire pits, and for the first time she sees the tribe not as a faceless enemy, but as people living lives filled with routine laughter and sorrow, and she feels the strange weight of curiosity mingled with lingering fear pressing on her chest. Taza moves beside her silently, his presence steady and protective, and every so often he gestures or points to something in the camp, and though she cannot understand his words, she watches the way his eyes follow her, ensuring her safety as she navigates the narrow paths between lodges and observes children darting between adults while women carry water or tend fires, and the rhythmic, ordinary life around her unsettles her expectations and makes her wonder how much she had misunderstood about these people. They pass a group of elders sitting in a circle, voices low and serious, their hands weaving patterns in the air as they speak. And Elena is struck by the respect the tribe shows them, the quiet attention that is not demanded through fear but offered willingly, and a pang of humility rises in her chest as she realizes that her anger had been fueled by fear and assumptions rather than truth, and the certainty she clung to begins to falter. Taza stops at a clearing where young warriors practice with bows and spears, and he gestures for her to observe the skill, the focus, the discipline that shapes them, and she watches as one misses a shot and another corrects his stance gently, not with ridicule but guidance, and Elena feels a faint stirring of admiration despite herself for the patience and care evident in each action, and the realization that these people are far more complex than she ever imagined begins to unsettle. Here a small girl runs past her, laughing, her bare feet kicking up dust, and the sound strikes Elena as almost painfully pure and innocent, and she cannot help but notice the sparkle in her eyes and the unguarded joy that belongs to someone untouched by tragedy, and it makes her heart ache with a longing she cannot name, and she finds herself gripping Taza's arm unconsciously, as if seeking a tether to hold herself steady amidst the emotions flooding her as they continue walking. Taza allows her to approach the animals and shows her the care the tribe gives to their horses and dogs and even the livestock, and Elena feels a strange respect for the quiet responsibility evident in every action and begins to understand that these people, who she once believed responsible for pain and destruction, live with codes of honor and nurture that are foreign to her experience, yet undeniably real. The afternoon drifts slowly into evening, and the camp prepares for the return of the hunters, bringing game back to share with the families, and Elena notices how the community works together in harmony, each task performed with respect for the other and for the balance of life, and she feels a tension within her release as if seeing this order and respect challenges every assumption she has held about hatred and revenge, and she realizes that her own judgment had been clouded by grief, and Taza watches her closely, his dark eyes calm and unwavering, and though he does not speak, Elena senses his attention and concern, and it is a reminder that he is not only her protector, but also her guide through this unfamiliar world, and the bond forming between them grows stronger with each passing hour as she begins to question whether the man who has kept her safe might also be the one who can teach her to see beyond anger and sorrow. By the time night falls, the camp is alive with quiet activity, fires burning and shadows dancing across the ground, and Elena sits beside Taza, feeling the warmth of his presence and the gentle rhythm of life continuing around them, and though she refuses to admit it, aloud she knows that her heart has begun to soften, and the walls she built to contain her hatred are starting to crumble beneath the realization that the world she thought she understood is far more complicated and beautiful than she could have imagined. Elena and Taza standing at the edge of the camp as the distant rumble of hooves shakes the earth and the air grows tense with the promise of violence, for the same men who ambushed her before have tracked them across the plains, and she feels a familiar surge of fear and fury coil in her chest because the memories of that night are still raw and vivid, and the sight of their banners and dust clouds on the horizon ignites every wound she thought she had closed. Taza's gaze narrows as he scans the horizon, measuring the threat, and though his face remains calm, she sees the subtle tightening of his jaw and the shift of his stance that marks him ready for battle. And she realizes that the man who seemed untouchable in gentleness is also capable of ferocity and strategy, and her heart beats faster at the knowledge that their lives hang in a fragile balance and that she is standing on the edge of danger she cannot control. He turns to her and speaks swiftly in his language, and though she cannot understand the words, the urgency in his tone is clear, and she feels a shiver of fear run through her body, yet also a strange sense of trust because she knows he would not bring her into harm's way lightly, and his presence alone fills her with a cautious courage that she did not know she possessed. The bandits approach with reckless speed and violence in their eyes, and the camp springs into action with disciplined precision, and Elena watches in awe and fear as Taza rallies the warriors, positioning them along the ridge and instructing with clarity and authority, and she feels a mix of admiration and terror because every move he makes is calculated and fearless, and she realizes that survival now depends on their unity and her willingness to trust him completely. She is urged to take cover but refuses to hide, and her pulse races as she draws a deep breath and joins the defenders wielding a spear under Taza's watchful eyes, and every motion feels instinctive yet terrifying because she knows one mistake could cost her life, and yet she cannot ignore the thrill of standing side by side with him, the man she swore to hate, the one who protected her and whose presence now ignites a fire in her. Chests that she struggles to contain. Arrows whistle through the air and dust rises as warriors clash with the intruders, and Elena moves with a careful fury, striking when she must, duck and retreat when necessary, and every glance at Taza gives her strength, for he fights with a controlled intensity that inspires her courage, and the bond between them strengthens in the heat of danger, and though fear grips her, she feels a pulse of exhilaration and a dangerous closeness to the man who challenges everything she believes about hatred and trust. At one crucial moment, a bandit lunges toward her, and Taza intercepts him, shielding her with his body, and in the struggle, he takes a wound in his side, and Elena's heart leaps with terror and guilt and fury, and she realizes with shocking clarity that her feelings for him are far deeper than she had allowed herself to admit, and the heat of fear and love and admiration mixes into an intensity that overwhelms her senses. When the battle finally wanes and the intruders retreat, the camp breathes a collective sigh of relief, and Taza kneels beside her, wiping sweat and blood from his brow, and she finds herself trembling, not from the exertion but from the sheer proximity of him, the knowledge of his bravery and the unspoken bond forged in shared peril. And though she swore she would hate him, she cannot deny the spark that has been set ablaze within her heart, and she feels both terrified and exhilarated by the realization that her life and emotions are entwined with the man who has shattered every certainty she ever held. Elena standing beside Taza in the quiet aftermath of the battle, and though the dust settles around them and the smoke from fires drifts lazily through the air, her heart races with adrenaline and something far deeper that she cannot name, and as she watches the warriors tending the wounded and securing the camp, she feels a strange sense of awe and relief for the precision and strength of Taza's leadership. Save them all, she notices the blood on his side and the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead, and without thinking she steps forward instinctively and presses her hands to the wound to stem the flow, and the contact makes them both freeze for a moment, and the proximity is electric and unfamiliar, and she feels the warmth of his body beneath her touch and the controlled strength of his hands guiding her, and though she tries to mask the flutter in her chest, she cannot ignore the danger of her emotions. Taza does not pull away. He steadies her gently with a calm assurance that sends a jolt through her, as if he understands more than she dares to admit, and when he speaks in his soft voice, the tone carries reassurance and quiet authority. And though she cannot understand the words fully, she feels the weight of their meaning, and a strange comfort settles over her. And for the first time she feels she is not alone in a world that has been cruel and relentless. The evening stretches on with the camp settling into routine once again, and Elena finds herself moving beside Taza, helping in small ways, carrying water, tending fires, and watching the children with cautious curiosity, and every glance they share, every subtle smile or word, deepens the bond forming between them, and she feels a dangerous warmth growing in her chest, a yearning she cannot name but cannot ignore. When night falls, Taza brings her to a quiet space away from the central lodge and sits beside her as the stars glimmer above and the firelight flickers across his features, and Elena notices the strength in his shoulders, the steady calm in his eyes, and she feels the tug of something more than admiration or gratitude for his protection. She feels a pull of desire that is both thrilling and terrifying, and she fights to maintain her composure. Though her body betrays her, he reaches out and brushes a stray lock of hair from her face, and she shivers at the touch and instinctively leans closer, though she quickly withdraws, trying to mask her feelings yet cannot deny the heat spreading through her chest and the rapid beat of her heart, and she realizes with a jolt that the man she swore to hate has become the center of her world, that his presence ignites a fire she thought long dead, and that the line between anger and longing has blurred beyond recognition. Taza speaks again softly, and she catches fragments of meaning through his tone and gestures, and she senses his care and his patience, and the way he respects her even as she struggles with her emotions, and in that moment she understands the dangerous closeness they share and the power of a connection formed through trust and life-threatening experience, and she feels the weight of her own vulnerability and the thrill of surrendering to it as the night deepens. They sit side by side, the quiet hum of the camp around them, and Elena allows herself to watch him without restraint, to observe the way he moves and breathes and the intensity of his gaze that seems to see every hidden part of her, and though she does not speak aloud, the truth settles inside her heart that her hatred has dissolved, and in its place something far more potent and terrifying has taken root, something that promises passion, danger, and love beyond anything she has ever known, and she feels herself falling into it willingly, yet with fear and exhilaration intertwine. The distant sound of hooves echoing across the plains and the knowledge that soldiers from the neighboring settlement have arrived to claim Elena and demand her return, and a knot of tension forms in her chest, because she knows that leaving would mean stepping back into the life she once knew, a life of security, but also of emptiness, a life that feels small compared to the fire that has been kindled in her heart by Taza and the tribe, and she feels a shiver of dread at the choice she must. Makataza stands beside her, calm and steady as always, yet she sees the tension in his shoulders, the subtle tightening of his jaw as he listens to the soldiers' shouts carrying across the clearing, and she realizes that his role as protector has never been more important, because the men approaching are dangerous and ruthless, and his care for her will be tested in ways that could change everything between them and around them in an instant. The soldiers demand her return, citing authority and law and the right of kinship, and she hears the words, though she does not speak their language clearly, but the tone is unmistakable, and Elena feels the pull of her past life tug at her heart, the life of expectations and duty and safety, but also the life of loneliness and grief, and the thought of leaving Taza and the camp brings a bitter ache she cannot ignore. Taza moves to stand slightly in front of her, his presence a shield that is both physical and emotional, and she feels the steady strength of him radiating toward her, and though she is afraid, she cannot help but feel a surge of gratitude and an even deeper, more dangerous emotion for the man who has shown her trust, care, in an entirely new way to see the world and herself, and she feels the heat of longing entwined with fear in her chest. The soldiers advance closer, and the tension becomes almost unbearable. As Elena weighs her options, the life of her past, a life of obligations and empty comforts, or the life she has begun to know here with Taza, a life of risk, love, and belonging, and the bond formed through battle, care, and quiet moments that have shaken every certainty she once held, and she feels a flutter of terror and exhilaration at the thought of stepping into the unknown. She realizes with clarity that the hatred she carried for so long has completely vanished, replaced by something raw and potent, a feeling that is more powerful than fear or revenge or duty, and she knows she cannot deny it any longer. The pull toward Taza is undeniable, the fire between them too strong to resist, and every glance, every touch, every quiet moment of care has shifted the landscape of her heart. Irreversibly, with a deep breath, she steps forward and speaks to the soldiers, her voice firm though trembling, and the choice is clear in her heart. She will not return to the empty life she left behind. She will not surrender the love and connection she has discovered, and she feels Taza's hand brush against hers, a subtle anchor, a silent affirmation, and the warmth of it sends a shiver through her, and she knows that in this moment she has chosen not only him but herself, the life she wants, the life that makes her heart beat with fire and hope. Soldiers hesitate, seeing her decision and the authority of Taza beside her, and though some continue to argue, the bond she shares with the Apache warrior cannot be denied, and Elena stands tall, her chest full of courage and resolve, and for the first time in a long time, she feels wholly alive and free, and the weight of fear and loss that once governed her steps dissolves into the night as she takes her place beside Taza, ready to embrace the uncertain but passionate path she has chosen and the life that awaits beyond fear and obligation, with Elena standing beside Taza under the wide expanse of stars that stretch endlessly above the camp and the quiet hum of night. carries a sense of peace she has not felt in years, and though the wind brushes against her face, she feels a warmth inside that has nothing to do with the fire flickering nearby and everything to do with the man who stands beside her and the bond forged through peril, care, and shared moments of truth. She reflects on the path that brought her here, the fire that destroyed her home, the fear that gripped her heart, the hatred she swore to carry forever, and she marvels at how each step of suffering led her to this point, to a moment where choice and desire intertwine, and she realizes with a jolt that the life she once thought was lost has transformed into something far richer, far more alive than she could have imagined, and that the man who once represented her fury now embodies her hope and passion. Taza speaks softly in his language, and though she does not understand every word, she feels the meaning flowing through his tone and gestures and the gentle strength in his gaze, and she recognizes that he too has been shaped by the journey. They have shared the trust, they have built the moments of fear and tenderness, and that the love growing between them is not fleeting but forged in the crucible of experience and danger, and emerges stronger for it. They walk together through the camp, past the lodges where the children sleep and the fires glow faintly, and the tribe moves with quiet purpose, and Elena notices the care and respect that underpins every action, and she feels a swell of belonging that she never expected to feel here among people she once feared and despised, and she understands now that home is not only a place but also a presence, a connection, a heart that can shelter and nurture. As they reach a secluded clearing, Taza kneels, slightly lowering himself to meet her gaze, and the firelight casts shadows that dance across his face, revealing both strength and gentleness. And Elena feels her chest tighten with a dangerous thrill of desire and longing, and yet it is tempered with safety and respect, and she realizes that this is the love she has been waiting for, the love that does not diminish her spirit but strengthens it and allows her heart to open fully. She steps closer, and their hands meet, their fingers entwining in a silent affirmation of the choice she has made and the path she has chosen, and she feels the heat of his palm searing into hers, and a pulse of exhilaration shoots through her as every vow of hatred she once carried evaporates, leaving only the fire of love and trust, and the quiet certainty that they will face the future together side by side. Around them, the camp sleeps peacefully, unaware of the intimate shift occurring in the clearing, and Elena breathes in the scent of pine and fire and the subtle warmth of Taza beside her. And she realizes that the world is wide and dangerous and beautiful, and that her heart has finally found its home in the presence of a man who has shattered her past and rebuilt her spirit with touch words and unwavering protection, and she feels a deep joy mingled with awe and a sense of destiny fulfilled. As the night stretches on, they remain together, hand in hand, hearts aligned, and she whispers her gratitude silently to the universe for the twists of fate that brought her here, and for the warrior who transformed her anger into love and despair into hope. And as the stars wheel overhead, she knows that whatever challenges may come their way, they will face them united, and that the heart that once swore only hatred now beats only for the man who ignited it with fire, passion, and a love that will endure beyond every storm and trial.